All right. Welcome to another episode of the Legacy Builders podcast. I'm your host, Kyle McGee. Excited for today. Got a special guest, Mr. Ashton Hayward. Ashton is an accomplished executive with deep experience in government, healthcare, and sports medicine. After graduating from Florida State University, go Noles, Hayward started his career as an executive with the AT&T Corporation and then the Financial Times. Upon returning to his hometown of Pensacola, Florida, he started and managed a successful real estate development company before turning his attention to local government. In 2010, Hayward was elected mayor of Pensacola as the first to hold a voter-approved CEO position, and he was reelected again in 2014. Currently serves as president of the Andrews Research and Education Foundation and co-founder of Andrews Medicine, a national orthopedic and sports medicine company led by world-renowned surgeon Dr. Jim Andrews. As a community leader, Hayward serves on several boards in the Pensacola area, and he and his wife, Ann, are actively involved in several local nonprofit and philanthropic organizations. Ashton, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you, Kyle. I greatly appreciate you having me on the show. I've heard nothing but great things about it. So it's an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to start the conversation, if you would, to kind of take us back to the beginning. What values or early life experiences shaped your path from corporate executive role to eventually becoming mayor of your hometown?
That's a great question. I remember as a young person growing up in Pensacola, always having, jobs here in our community. And one of the first jobs that really humbled me was as a busboy here in town with a lovely guy that grew up the street from me. He had five brothers and sisters in Cordova Park on Stringfield, Barrett McLean. And he worked at the Melting Pot. He was a manager. And myself and a couple other friends locally, our parents said, "You need to get a job." And so we all like stepped in and we're bussing tables, and as you call it in the kitchen, getting in the pit and cleaning those dishes. And if anyone of your listeners is eating at the melting pot, we all know it can get a little challenging, if you will. So that was one of my first jobs. I think I was 15 or 16, and we could only work a certain amount of hours, I believe. And then my family had started Pensacola Builder Supply Company here in 1927. And I worked in the lumber yard as a teenager. And I never forget, hanging out inside in the air condition. And my father said, "Ashton, you need to get out in the lumber yard and you better build relationships with those folks out on the yard that are sweating in 100-degree weather and earn their respect. That's who you need to earn the respect of, is the folks that work for us out here. And they're the ones that are bringing the value." So I remember sweating as a young person out there, and, having jobs like that teach you to get out there and work with the little guy, if you will, and understand how much effort and time they put into a job 8 hours a day to really kind of get you humble, get your feet on the ground and respect that. And more importantly, to teach you how to work with every different demographic. I think that's incredibly important, no matter if you're at the low end of the totem pole or you're in the C-suite. It's incredibly important to listen to people, know where they come from. So those jobs in the beginning really humbled me. And then obviously, as I got older, I worked at a few different banks here. I worked for the Woodbury family that owned Bank of the South, Warrenton Bank, and I kind of graduated, if you will, up the food chain. And one of the coolest offices I had one summer was out there on the Gulf of Mexico, when the branch used to literally sit on the Gulf. And if your listeners know, obviously they know where the pier is at Casino Beach, all the way to the west, to the former Margaritaville. And they used to have the Five Flags Hotel, but it's close to 1,400 feet on the Gulf of Mexico. That was my office. And so I would work there and then hit the golf course. It really kind of taught me a lot about starting at the bottom and then, getting into that aspect of kind of how corporate America worked, again, as a teenager, that is. And then had jobs in college, from waiting tables to hosting at Florida State. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for sharing. And then you had a unique experience being raised in a small town of Pensacola, going to Florida State, and then doing a decade in the big city, New York City. What was that experience like, and how instrumental was that in your growth in your 20s, early 30s and into your next leadership roles?
That's a great question. I think, New York City is such an interesting place. It's dynamic, it's full of energy. It's one of the most diverse cities in the world, if not the most diverse city in the world. And I think no matter who you are, either you like it or you don't like it when you visit. And obviously, when you live there, a lot of friends that I knew had lived there, a couple of years and said, "Hey, it's not for me." And I think with my personality, I kind of just kind of jumped out at me, and all the stimulation you have with the culture, the history, the arts. It was just amazing. The architecture and the dense 9 million people living on top of each other. So it was interesting. I was fortunate to get a job with AT&T Corporation, and that was literally through a relationship at Florida State. A dear friend of mine's father was head of external affairs for Southwestern Bell, and technology was coming on heavy in the United States in 1993. We didn't even have email. So for your listeners, I'm dating myself, but it was very, it was dynamic. I mean, you were competing, as I've told many people, for the elevator in your building, to the sidewalk, to get to the subway station, to compete for the train, to get to work before you even got into your office environment and your corporate environment where there was competition. So the city really taught you to be fearless. And I kind of just, again, my personality probably lean that way, and I love the energy, and it was just it was addicting, the energy in Manhattan. So it really taught me. I mean, that was the days about cold calling. Back in the day, this was voice, and then we went into point to point, and then the digital craze came on, and then we were selling private lines and bandwidth and all those things that we hear about now. But it was a great learning experience. And then my next job was with the Financial Times, which is arguably one of the most first read newspapers, with presidents, prime ministers, the Salmon color newspaper, the FT out of London. So that was a great experience.
Yeah, I bet it was. Being a Pensacola born and raised guy, I went the opposite way. So my first job out of Florida State was in Key West. And talk about the wrong move. I won't say the wrong move. Like, everything happens for a reason, but it was the opposite of what I was uh, maybe needed, as far as fast paced environment. And like, that was the opposite. However, I could imagine, though, that competitiveness from New York City brought a different level of energy to when you came and decided to move back to Pensacola. So, talk to me about the transition from corporate level to what was your first job, or what enticed you to come back to Pensacola, and then what did you first start doing?
Yeah, it's interesting, Kyle. My wife, Ann, really loved Pensacola, as we all do. This is such an incredible place to grow up, and the natural assets that we were exposed to as a young person, you almost don't really appreciate them until you leave. But my wife really loved Pensacola, and at the time, she just needed an airport. She had built a great career for herself, and she loved Pensacola. And she said, "Let's move to Pensacola." And I was like, I really wasn't on board. And I said, I don't want to leave Manhattan. You grew up in a condo, and in Europe, a lot of folks, most live in condos. And I said, we can do that if we want to have a child, or we can raise our child in the city. Many people do. And I was like, this is going to be challenging. But what we did do is we bought a little condo off Scenic Highway that my first cousin owned, and they were ready to grow their family. And so Ann and I bought that, and we, every time I had time off and I started spending some of the weekends, every other weekend, I'd leave on a Thursday and spend a year of due diligence down here in Pensacola to see if I could really move home. And my dear friend, childhood friend from the age of 3, went to St. Paul's Elementary, to Catholic High, Florida State. He was living in the city at the time, and then he moved back to Pensacola. And you being a Seminole, he majored in finance and real estate, got that great degree. And after a year, we ended up moving to Pensacola, is the point, and we started Hayward Properties, a little development company, and really kind of focused on the niche of buying land, holding. And at the time, I was buying a lot of real estate, little lots, nothing, fancy, west of City Hall, actually. And, we would hold them, and every couple of years sell a lot here and there. So we started a little development company. So that's exactly what I did when I moved home. And I was fortunate that I could start my own business and get to work.
Yeah, I love it. And that leads us to the next part of your story, which is the transition into the mayor of Pensacola. So not only did you move back, you actively sought a role to have a real impact in the future of the city. So, what was that mindset shift, or what was the first reason for you to have it sparked an interest and to seek a leadership role in government? Because from my understanding, you've had no political experience until you became the mayor.
Correct. Correct. I was a political science major, and I thought about going to law school. And as everyone knows, I chased a young lady to New York City, i.e., the story we just chatted about. But I loved politics, and a lot of the education I got at school was I knew that everything you do in life is politics, and that stuck with me. And I think our community being America's first settlement in an old city, we had a lot of great bones about us, but we really weren't telling the narrative of why you should live here, why you should move here, why you should come make an investment here. We had a lot of growth out at Pensacola Beach. I was very fortunate to have some success those first few years when I moved home. And then, obviously, as we all know, the Great Recession happened in 2008, and that rocked the global markets. It rocked the world. It touched every city on the globe, if you will, right down here to little old Pensacola. And a group of us got together, really two women kind of drove the narrative on the charter change, which was Dee Dee Davis, who you may know, and Crystal Spencer, the lawyer here in town. And I was kind of a younger of the group of folks at the time. And we really just thought about this charter change. And St. Petersburg they had a charter change to have a strong mayor, as they call it, which is the executive branch. And I was helping people get elected when I moved home, raising money for candidates and really getting involved in our local government, sitting on the architectural review board, the zoning board, the planning board. So I really started leaning in, obviously being in real estate and seeing how government worked. And Pensacola was an anomaly, which was fascinating to me personally. Probably a lot of people don't know this. If you think about our government, the city at the time was a little over 50,000, but we drove everything financially, legally, culturally, education, military, healthcare wise. We really drove the narrative in Northwest Florida. So when you think about Florida, there's 23 million people, but there's about a million six, million 650, plus or minus west of Tallahassee. So being America's oldest settlement, a lot of history, the Navy, cradle of naval aviation, we had this whole great story. And so we also ran 4 enterprises that really was interest of me. So you think about it as a young person, the crash happens. What are you going to do? The real estate market's flat on its back. Do I go hide out? Do I move to Europe for a little while? My wife's, dual citizen. What do you do? And I was so leaned in our community, had a lot of investment in Pensacola. Obviously, there was a ballot. We got on the ballot in 2009 to change the form of government to a strong mayor form of government. That passed. And then, we got back together, the same group of folks, and said, hey, who's going to run for office? And, Kyle might know more about policy. David might know more about finances, but I really felt like I could win. And it was probably just kind of being young a little bit, a little naive maybe, but I was kind of driven to really see what we could do and make a positive impact. And I knew I could raise the money. At that time, no dollar was really raised in these political races locally, whether it was county commission, city council, or mayor. And being a new form of government, I knew if you had the executive branch that was accountable to the people, and on the ballot, it passed overwhelmingly by 55%. So I knew the town was vulnerable. And I knew if things were lining up for an upset, if you will, if you want to kind of use that metaphor in sports. So we got after it. I raised the money and we got in the race. I think I filed pretty late, to be quite honest. And we did. And as you know, we took on Mike Wiggins, who is a lovely gentleman here in town. And I've known him my whole life, just a great individual. And 2 other folks were in the race. And we got to the runoff, and the rest is history. I won in November, and it was a tight race. I think it was like 810 to 702. So it was intense, and so it was kind of like, catching the dog catching the bumper, if you will. I had to get after it, and I really couldn't afford to fail, Kyle, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and it seems to be a reoccurring theme that, when I'm having these conversations with people that perform at the peak at whatever they do, it's when their back is against the wall is when their best self comes out, right? And so you mentioned that you didn't have an opportunity. There was, you weren't going to fail, right? And so you made it happen. And you strike me as a guy who likes to challenge and reinvent yourself often. So you you have a corporate role, you kind of be an entrepreneurial for a little bit, and then you're like, hey, I'm going to take on this challenge. There's an opportunity, and you're going to lean into the political space. Talk to me about seeking discomfort in your quest for growth.
I think that is number one in success. And I tell a lot of folks when I'm speaking or to young folks, you have to be vulnerable to be successful. You have to be uncomfortable. And it's important to, if you're going to lead, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to face criticism, face your detractors. Everyone's not going to agree with you. Your own family doesn't agree with you. Your parents don't agree with you. Your wife, whoever it may be. So, I mean, if you know that going into it, the old line is all they're going to tell you is no, right? And no means yes if you can figure out how to negotiate and navigate. So those kind of things didn't bother me. And, going back to New York City, I was back in the days of cold calling and skyscrapers and getting thrown out of buildings. And, the guy Seymour, the one that wanted to see more information, and as we all know, most CEOs want to talk to a young guy like yourself because you might have a great idea that we want to lever up. And so it's interesting for me. I looked at it as a challenge, and I had nothing to lose. And I was probably fearless, back then. And definitely as you age, unfortunately, I'm still kind of bullish, but things do change. But I understood the executive branch, Kyle, and the legislative branch. And the governor of Florida doesn't hang out with the legislature, and the president of the United States doesn't hang out in Congress unless it's the state of the state or the state of the union. And I knew that I was elected to be a CEO, and I worked for the taxpayer. And I knew if I kind of had this kind of thought process and surrounded myself with smarter people than myself, I could be successful. You don't always choose the right people, and sometimes you fail. And that gets back to your question of being vulnerable or discomfort. Uncomfortable is good, right? Because therefore you learn. And when you take those learning experiences in the next position that you're in or the next situation, that knowledge comes to you. And I'm big on knowledge transfer. I think that's so important to pass on to the next person or the next generation or whoever it may be.
And thank you for sharing. And I want to go deeper in some of your mindsets and habits and beliefs, but I don't want to gloss over your impact as the mayor, right? So I was still in high school, honestly, when you got elected. And Pensacola, you didn't go downtown Pensacola. Like, it wasn't really a place to hang out. And, there were some leaders like Quint Studer and other business leaders who started pouring into our city. But I think that you played a key role in leading some of the positive changes and growth Pensacola has experienced over the recent years. What were you most proud of from your time in office?
I think those 8 years, the most, number one thing I'm probably the most proud of is the cultural shift, changing the mindset of the Pensacolians in our community, that we can be winners, that we can, drive great outcomes. We are smart people. And I was able to tell that story over and over again in Tallahassee, which is incredibly important when you are the head of a city or a county, is to have the relationship in Tallahassee. And I was able to build a great relationship with our former governor, Rick Scott, and now our U.S. Senator of Florida, Rick Scott is. And it was very important to kind of, change the focus in Pensacola that we can create a dynamic downtown. And, the downtown is the heartbeat of any city, depending on the size, of course. But I knew our city was 39 square miles, and we were the driver, as I mentioned earlier, that if I could create this energy and it was what it was supposed to look like, narrowing roads, better landscaping, recruit businesses downtown, small businesses, which are the backbone of America, right? I mean, all these little things. I was asking folks to come downtown and move their business downtown, and we had some anchors, but really create that value, design things correctly. Whether it was obviously a stormwater park, Admiral Mason was my first project as the mayor, but have the right people that knew about landscape architecture and knew about stormwater, narrowing Main Street, planting the oak trees that would eventually look like 12th Avenue, our historical 12th Avenue, the baseball stadium. We had to build that. We changed things where it looked differently. The retention pond in front of the park, completely different than what it was going to be. The amphitheater, completely different than what it was going to look like. It was going to be like a rest stop off I-10, and we changed the look and feel of that. So when you're out in the bay, you see this and say, what is that? Those are important things when you're working for the taxpayer. They deserve to have quality. And I loved urbanism. I loved architecture. My wife's from Antwerp, Belgium, which is one of the coolest cities in Europe to walk and ride your bike. And living in Manhattan really taught me a lot about those things. The meatpacking district was coming online when I left New York City, and then the High Line came online. So all these things that I learned, I knew I could have that knowledge transfer. Now the challenge was, Kyle, is I was young, right? In Pensacola, good people here, but you didn't have a lot of young people in positions of power, whether that was, in corporate America or, in government, if you will. So framing that vision, I think after a year or two, people started getting on board and understood, they knew what I was talking about. So it was fortunate that people really wanted our town to be successful. And again, it goes back to that vulnerability that the citizens were vulnerable, which I knew. And I said, if I can lay out this plan, I feel like I can get them to buy in. Changing names, like our gas company was called ESP. Well, we changed the name to Pensacola Energy. Gas companies, you got energy is a big word when it comes to utilities, right? Changing the airport's name to Pensacola International Airport instead of regional. When you start pigeonhole yourself, the folks that are moving the needle, they don't take notice, so to speak. So just little tweaks like that, I felt like would help us. And that's what we did. We got after it.
Yeah, and it a couple things come to mind when you shared that. And you said your number one driver was culture. And to build a great culture takes a leader with vision, right? And this is what you're talking about when you're changing instead of from regional to international, when you're changing these small improvements, whatever they may have been. I was riding around on my way into work this morning, and I took a detour and just started cruising through some of our waterfront and seeing everything that's happening around it, and that could happen. And it's inspiring to me because I think we're just scratching the surface of how cool Pensacola really could be. What do you think? Where do you see the biggest opportunities for Pensacola to continue its positive growth trajectory?
Well, I think we have just a tremendous amount of upside where we are. And I think if you're fortunate to lead a company, a church, the leader in the family, or a politician and really lead, you want the better days to be after you leave office. And I think we're really starting to hit some really good strides right now. And you think about just the materialistic details of our bridge. I mean, I'm sure plenty of folks don't know. I wanted that bridge white. DOT painted it white. I wanted large pedestrian. They gave me large pedestrian. I wanted LED lighting. They did that. I mean, we even painted I-110 when you come into the city limits. DOT always had these great grants to do these things. And you really needed to make sure your appearance of your city was powerful, right? And so when Kyle McGee hypothetically flew into Pensacola, Florida, the airport needed to look good. Whether you're getting an Uber, I mean, this was how we didn't even have Uber when I was in office until we, allowed that. So every little detail to me meant something to me. So when I did a stormwater park, to your point, everything needed to look correctly, whether it was Corrine Jones, Admiral Mason, Bill Gregory on pace. I mean, all those little details were critical because when visitors visit, the first thing they're saying is, oh, this is a nice, clean town, right? I think what we have going on now, and the folks that came before me and the folks that are here now, I mean, it's just total upside. We live in the Florida. There's no state income tax. We're a business-friendly, state. We want people to move here. And those were one of the things that I was, I loved when I heard about people moving to Pensacola because, you're very proud of being here, but you got to grow. And originally, one of your questions is we were stagnant. We had atrophy. Our friends to the east, our friends to the west were lapping us. And that was another reason I ran for office because we were just stagnant, thinking that we could exchange money between 10 families in Pensacola and be successful. There was no way we were going to be successful if you continued to do that. You had to create value, the right infrastructure, and tell the story.
Yeah, and I wasn't planning on asking this, but you share all these things and about how you come into the city and coming into anywhere in the town. Man, what can we do to get the Civic Center bulldozed and redone? I know that's not a city of Pensacola deal, but man, would that be a game changer for our area to get that
Well,
reimagined?
I think the question is why not, right?
Why not?
Why not? Like, why wouldn't Ashton Hayward become the mayor? Why wouldn't I win, right? I mean, well, there's plenty of things why not. But the reality is, if you don't think big, I've never read any history of any, corporate titan, business person, pastor, the pope, whatever it may be, that didn't think big. Why not? We've had so much tremendous growth. These are the next things that we need to be doing. I mean, we need to really look at that. How are we going to have more population downtown? How are we going to create more value? Just because they do a renovation or a new, place for gatherings, whether it's an entertainment district like where the Bay Center is right now in Los Angeles, doesn't mean we can't do it in Pensacola, Florida. I mean, why not make it very intimate, quality, and just have another vision for that area of the community? We have to tie all these things together, and it's incredibly important. Again, getting back to 39 square miles, to create density, you have to do vertical kind of projects that will create that value of a walkable community. And I think we need to really look at it. We need to really look at developing that port.
Oh, that was going to be
I
my
mean,
next thing. I was going to say, why not the port with this
and
waterfront?
Kyle, I got that question a lot, and it's a great question. When I was in office, there's only so much bubble gum you can chew, even though it was, you think, oh, it was 8 years. Well, as you know, days turn into weeks, weeks, months, months, years fast. And that 8 years blew by, and my baby was obviously downtown on top of shrinking government, lowering taxes, and creating the right platform for people to be successful in our community. I couldn't get to everything, if you will. I tried to, but the port has a great opportunity, just like the Bay Center, that whole quadrant right there. One of the big things that we did when I was in office is get American Magic here. And that was one phone call from Jim Andrews, who's my boss and partner now, to me in, I think, February of 18, and said, "Hey, Ashton, they'd like to get out of Key West." And I said, "Well, bring them to Pensacola. I'll give them the west side of the port." And that was because Dr. Andrews was very close with the DeVos family. And we made that happen. And the rest is kind of history. But those are the kind of relationships and the dots you must connect in business and politics. As I mentioned earlier, everything's politics. And we got those folks here, and it's been amazing. The past administrations have done a good job, and Mayor Reeves has done a good job of cementing that. And we make sure we keep that relationship, going.
Yeah, and so we could make up. Maybe we'll do a whole nother separate podcast about the Civic Center and the port redevelopment. Um, but I want to go into kind of this next phase of the conversation, which you alluded to perfectly because you brought up Dr. Andrews, and you have been close with guys like Quint Studer and Chad Henderson, and Dr. Andrews and the Woodburys, and some just really significant, influential people here in locally here in Pensacola. What is your philosophy on, or how do you build and maintain strong key relationships?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when you're young, you have conversations with your parents and your sisters. I have three sisters, um, obviously your spouse. And I think my mom always kind of framed it up that was, we all have gifts, everybody. And I was very fortunate to have this great network of friends as a young person. And then in college, and then as I got out of college, and obviously the folks here in Pensacola, but my first job with Mr. Woodbury, God rest his soul, was, my dad said, write a letter to Mr. Woodbury and tell him you want to work for him. And I knew he was one of the most influential people in Pensacola. As I stated, I'm an old Pensacola family here. That's great. It's lovely. You know the folks here, but you got to grow. And I was always kind of focused on growth and building Pensacola. And Mr. Woodbury wasn't from here. I think Mr. Woodbury was from Kansas. Mr. Studer, Quint, he's not from here. He's from Wisconsin, right? So those are two folks that have done a lot. And I was close with a lot of folks in town that did a lot of great things. But it's important to touch those relationships, stay in touch with them, ask questions. I think one of the number one things we can do, whether we're young or in our 20s or 30s or as we age, is to be curious, to never stop learning, right? And I think, we're going through this phase right now. We're doing a podcast, right? I mean, we read so much online now. We don't grab the book off the shelf to get the information. We look something up. We have AI. But I love people, and I love learning from those that are not from my same background and what I was exposed to. I was so fortunate to have two incredible parents. My mother's still with us. And I was exposed to a lot, and they taught me to really touch as many people that were different than me. so I could learn, right? And relationships are everything. And when you get to my age, you trade on credibility and you trade on trust. And if someone asks me to do something, and if it's in my power to help them be successful, and whatever that may be, it could be taking their car to the mechanic, or it could be maybe putting a good word in for an interview, whatever that may be. That's what you're supposed to do in humanity.
Yeah, and there's so much wisdom in what you just shared there, and I think what I've found in my short career is that the more you ask, the more people want to help you, and the more curious you are, and the action you take on the information people share. Like, it's kind of rare that people actually do something with it. So when you do, they want to lean in and continue to help you. So I've seen that firsthand in my career. So thank you for sharing. Something that I've personally been thinking about and kind of going back and forth in my brain about is so success, and people that are the most successful people, they have a strong desire for it. Are you born with that desire? Do are some people maybe gifted from God a little bit more of talents, more skills, more desire to be successful? Is it something you cultivate? Like, where do you think your desire to be successful came from?
That is the $1 million question, right? I don't think that you can teach hungry, and I'm always hungry. And what I mean by that is probably in the 7 days of the week, I'm always thinking about a new idea, or who can I touch? What relationship can I build? What better can we do in the community to make Pensacola the best place to live, work, and play? As I religiously said, thousands of times when I was in office. And so my mind is always rolling on just, I love architecture. I love like good design. I probably, my mind always goes to the wall there where there's a scratch into it. For some reason, I look at these little,
Imperfections.
imperfections that I obsess about. And that's probably been a part of my DNA forever. And I think I strive for perfection to the point of where it kind of makes you crazy a little bit. But I think that's a good thing. I've learned to deal with it more. I know no one's perfect. I'm damn sure not perfect. But I love to try to strive for that. And I think to be successful, you have to live it, breathe it, smell it, eat it, as I say, and ask a lot of questions. And there's definitely a time for downtime and off the phone with your wife, for sure. And I've had to learn to be better at that. But you can't teach hungry. Either someone's going to be hungry and curious and want to be successful all the time, or they're not. Maybe it's 60% for them. Maybe it's 50%. But I kind of like it. And I think there's plenty to go around. That's one thing I think that's important to know, that, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, and there's plenty of food to eat at the food trough, if you will. You got to spread the wealth. I think your leaders are going to rise to the top. That's just the way it happens, whether it's in sports or business or politics. I think that's important. People gravitate to what they like. They buy what they like, as I used to say. So that's important.
So talk to me through some of your non-negotiable habits and routines that help keep you performing at a high level.
Yeah. I've always been one to kind of, exercise. I wasn't this, wild, guy that went to the gym to bulk up, but I think when I was in New York City, you walked everywhere, right? You're either on the subway or the bus or walking everywhere. So that was really, a plus. And it's funny, I did the reverse in New York City. I would work out after work because I think the energy of people getting off work, getting on the subway and then heading to the gym. And when I moved home, I started working out in the mornings. And when I was in office, it was funny, Kyle, I would ride my bike from East Hill, where I live now, down to Anytime Fitness right there in Alkanese. And I was kind of feeling guilty. That Catholic guilt would set in a little bit. And I'm like, God, should I be going to the gym as the mayor? And then a few people that were more wiser than me would say, hey, Ashton, we really love seeing you in the gym. That's great. The mayor is healthy and you're on your bike. And so I was like, wow, this is a great narrative for our community, is like, we need to be a healthy city, right? And so I kind of took on that, and I love that. And so now I hit the gym in like 3 days a week with a great trainer, young guy, Tucker Massey. And then I do a lot of cardio in the off days. So that's one thing that I couldn't live without, Kyle, is exercise. And I think moving is so important. When you read today about movement, no matter what it is, and walking's probably better for us than running just because of our joints and the business I'm in now. But I've had a couple knee surgeries just because of being active. But yeah, I can't live without the energy. Um, I like to have a beer, but I probably don't have as many as I used to. And I'm really at that stage where I'm like, listen, I want to live forever. And, none of us are going to be able to do that. But I try to be in the best shape and health as possible. And of course, I like to cheat and eat some things that aren't good for me, but drink a lot of water. And, that's what I do.
What that again is another like reoccurring theme. Every successful the people at the top of their game, there's so much science behind it now about the importance of exercise and your energy. And talk to me about what kind of mood and mental framework that you gain from the exercise, like what it does to your mind.
It's huge. I mean, think about some of the music that you might love. What that does to you. It starts to get you to think. It starts to get you to get creative. But it gives me clarity, and I like to be real clear. Like I want to have like just extreme clarity. While you're thinking about making a phone call, or we write things down, we put it in our phone, we do all those things. But you have to have clarity and be clear. And I think exercise does that for you. Even if your exercise is walking 30 minutes a day, you don't need to go throw around a lot of weight, but I think that's important. And it drives me in my energy. And I've probably always had a lot of energy, but the reality is exercise as you age is so important. And what I like to live in is health span. That's a term that people are starting to hear a lot about, is health span. And that's the quality of your life while you're living. Why are you going to wait till you retire, or you're starting to react when you start getting some of these morbidities that might come on as you age, right? Or things that you face from aging, right? I want to have the best health span I can to have the best quality of life while I am living and doing right now.
I love it. I love it. The show's called Legacy Builders. When it's all said and done, when you're at the end of your time, what do you hope your legacy is defined as?
I hope that I always, when I touch someone, that they want to maybe interact with me again. Or, Ashton was polite. He was nice. He held the door for me. He really made me feel like I was number one, because I do believe that. It sounds like a cliche, but it's so important how you treat someone at your first interaction. It's like I tell the young people and friends and my son, I only have so many seconds to make an impact. When I touch someone and introduce myself and shake their hand, I want to make sure that was the best experience they ever had, or I strive for that. And so when I'm gone, hopefully my family and my wife and my son, really know that I loved them, cared about them, my sisters, my mom, my friends. I think it's important. You need to tell people you love them. You need to try to do the best. I don't always do the best, but I try to do the best. And you really, lifting people up is incredibly important. Whether it's a friend or a family member, whether you're a pastor or a priest, whatever it may be, business is important, because you need to drive that culture and that energy every single day to have the right ecosystem and the right environment. And one of the coolest things I love seeing my city workers to this day, whether they're picking up the trash or working on a gas line or downtown. I love, screaming out the window and, how are you doing? What's going on? And I think we were able to get them to buy in, to see the vision and what we did and what the plan was. And now they're seeing the benefits of where Pensacola is today. I don't think any of them probably thought that was going to ever happen. And so I think, like you said earlier, destiny and things that happen. And I was fortunate. It was raining. It was a bad day. A sheriff deputy just got shot in November when I was walking from Seville Square to Vinyl Music Hall. I was prepared to lose. As you said earlier in your show, are you prepared to be vulnerable and maybe lose? And when Mike Wiggins called me and, said, hey, Ashton, congratulations, I was like, wow. But you got to be ready for those moments. You got to prepare for the worst and expect the best. And drive it home. And I want my legacy to be that people knew that I really gave a damn.
Yeah, no, love it. And you said something in there about your reputation and about how oftentimes we have this just short window. There's a quote, and I couldn't quote it exactly, but you spend your whole life building a reputation, and it only takes 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute to ruin it. Right. So like at your every interaction matters, and it ultimately ends up being who you become, right? What you do on a daily basis. So I want to wrap this up with a couple more just a few more questions. If you could speak, and you probably do, but if when you're speaking directly to young leaders looking to create lasting change, whether that's in politics, business, healthcare, whatever role it is, what advice would you give them about building a legacy that matters?
Yeah, really be, and said that word probably four times, but really be curious about the person you're talking to because, we have never walked in their shoes, right? So when you're talking to somebody, it might be a wonderful conversation. The energy is just exploding. However, the person might be melancholy that day, or you don't know what happened before they left the house. You don't know what they're personally going through, and so I really think it's important to make sure when you're chatting with someone, be aware. I always talk about situational awareness and know your surroundings and know your audience, and just realize that you at this first interaction you might not know them. So be positive, listen. That's one thing that I work on a lot is try to be a better listener, and hopefully I'm getting there. I know this is a podcast, but I think it's important to really realize your audience and who you're talking to make sure that you also give each other credit. You don't know where that person's come from and where they've been and the challenges they've gone through and who they're taking care of at home, whether it's a child or a parent. I used to say when I was in office, Kyle, I said, you'd have your silo of friends that would call you and say, "Oh, Ashton, you're in the paper and this and that." And I'm like, listen, the majority of our folks in Pensacola are picking up a child from school, dropping a kid off from school. Two parents are working, out of work, trying to pay the mortgage, try to go to the grocery store. They're worried about making sure that law enforcement has got what they need in a response time of 3 minutes and our essential services are working. That's what they're really worried about in public safety. So, it's interesting. So you got to make sure that you really are have a lot of empathy for who you're talking to in the very beginning.
Yeah, one of the most recommended books when I ask people for book recommendations on this podcast, it's the classic How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And the number one principle is when you're trying to lead others, you ask about the other person. You don't talk about yourself and what you think and your mentality, your mindset, or what you think about this. You ask about others, right? And that's exactly what you share right there. Be curious and seek to add value to serve others, right? That's why we're here. On that note, you can't use that one because that one's been referenced like the past 5 times. What is, if you could only pick one book that's not seek or How to Win Friends and Influence People, what would be your top book recommendation to a young aspiring entrepreneur, leader, young person?
Well, I think one of the things we talk about, what you would have liked to do more of, especially when you're younger, is really history and studying history. And it's, again, I never thought I was going to be the mayor, but I felt like it was a calling or something I needed to do, and I was very fortunate, blessed to win. But study more history and globally, if you will. And I think whether it's Washington and what he did in the Revolutionary War, defeating the British Empire. I'm reading a really cool book right now, In the Hands of the People by John Meacham. Meacham's done great books on Reagan, Bush. I mean, I heard him speak recently, and it really talks about equality, faith, freedom, compromise, and the art of citizenship. It's just not about what your government should do for you, but really what should you do as a citizen and part of the citizenry of a community, a state, a nation, and lean in, volunteer. I think, when you volunteer, your mindset gets better. Everything about volunteering is incredibly important. So this book really talks a lot about what Jefferson did, our third president. And, that is so important as one of the founding fathers. So I'm trying to do more of that. And this book is really cool, In the Hands of the People by John Meacham. So I think it's really cool because, history, you can kind of weave it in and out and thread the needle in business too. And I think that's important. And you talked a lot about legacy. I'm working for arguably the greatest orthopedic surgeon ever, Jim Andrews. 50 years he's been doing the same thing of teaching young people and how important innovation and research is, and staying engaged with education. I mean, I think that's to keep you stimulated, and so it's so powerful.
Yeah, and that's a unique answer, and I'm glad you shared because one of the things that I've poured into the past decade, like my learning journey, really didn't start till after college. Like I was borderline in a lot of areas, but I picked it up after college, and I really started reading. And one thing that it was like a Charlie Munger quote or something, but it was about studying history's greatest founders and entrepreneurs through autobiographies and biographies, and it was making the imminent dead your mentors, right? Like there's so much wisdom in these autobiographies that people who accomplish great things are writing of the recollection of their lives and what they learned. And you can gain so much even if you don't have a great mentor and someone here local that you're able to go sit down with. And then there's a podcast out that pretty much the only one I listen to, and it's called Founders by David Senra, and he reads these biographies and autobiographies and then breaks them down. And it's what you're talking about. It's go back in history. History tends to repeat itself. Whether we have technology and there might be a lot of different, but the principles stay the same, right? And so that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Well, this has been a great conversation. For the people listening that want to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can definitely. I'm easy to find, pretty much, but I always welcome anyone calling me. I talked to this young man today, and he graduated from Booker T. Washington, and wanted to talk about ST engineering and getting a job out there, which was a big aerospace company that I was fortunate to recruit here. And hell, they can call me on my cell phone. They can email me. I'm easy to get. You know.
Yeah, we'll put a link to Ashton's email in the show notes, and then we won't put out your cell phone. We'll let them reach out to your email. But yeah, no, thanks again for coming on. Great conversation. Think that there's a lot of wisdom and a lot for people to learn from this. So appreciate you. Appreciate everything you've done in our community, and definitely think you're building a strong legacy.
Well, you're very kind, Kyle, and I want to applaud you for creating legacy builders. And, all of us stand on the shoulders of giants that came before us. And there's a lot of people in Pensacola that helped me along the way, and a lot of mentors and people that are helping me to this day. And it doesn't always come in the age, right? So you can have some really great people that teach you a lot of things that are younger than you. I had a lot of friends that were older than me, which was interesting here in Pensacola, that were very influential in our community. But what I like to do is I try to like get all the information and things that they learned and mistakes they made, and make sure that you try to learn from those things. So keep doing what you're doing, man, and bravo to you and all the folks that have done your podcast. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Appreciate it very much. And thank you all for listening. Have a great day.